Hi folks, welcome to the Prepared Homestead. This is Travis. Thank you all for stopping by to watch. Well, there's more fear and panic being just spewed everywhere. This new variant, while it's so terrifying that it's almost as severe as the common cold. And everyone's going to get it. And it's like minute by minute, every time you decide to check the news or something of where it's at, what new cases is, been found and how bad it's going to be. But yet they also say that, well, it's not really bad. It's actually kind of weak and mild, but it's really something to be scared of, right? That's what we're starting to see. If you've been checking the news or following any news stuff over the last few days, is this panic. And it's gonna, I think it's gonna kind of roll into other problems that we've seen happen over the last 2 years with specifically the supply chain. They're already kind of setting the stage for that with certain articles from like the New York Times and different publications like that, that this new variant, it's gonna play havoc on the supply chain. The supply chain is bad. They were just, if you remember just a few weeks ago, I was saying that they were just starting to say, well, I think we've got this figured out. It's kind of interesting how this all plays out. And I'm not saying necessarily that this was planned in advance, but for the last several months, really about a year, we've all been talking about this supply chain problem. And there's been pretty much crickets in the mainstream news. Until a few weeks back, it was like they finally woke up and realized that there's a supply chain problem. And in fact, we talked about that fact, that they finally were waking up. They were finally admitting that there's lots of ships out there off the coast of some of these big ports that aren't getting unloaded, that there's going to be shortages come this winter, that people aren't going to be able to get all the goods and the stuff that they want, and that shelves are getting bare, and that there's a problem. And then all of a sudden, it seems like the whole news switched to all these other things that are distracting. And it's just been kind of one right after another of things happening here in the United States. And then now this big global scare of a new variant that's, well, hardly even as bad as a common cold, according to the people that's actually studied this, I guess. So it's interesting how that, once they finally admit that, yeah, there's a supply chain problem, then they go into this distracting phase and we don't hear anything about it anymore. Well, they're now mentioning it again. Guess what? This new variant, it could play havoc on an already frail, weak, collapsing, falling apart supply chain system. So get ready, folks. They're talking about it potentially causing even more slowdowns in China at the ports here, all different areas from the beginning to the end of the supply chain, because there's a potential for shutdowns and limitations and lockdowns in different areas and all these different things because of this new wave that's just spreading around the world. So they're setting that stage for that. We're already hearing with the supply chain more and more stuff, shortages everywhere. I mentioned a few days ago about medicines, and guess what? The FDA is saying that in fact there are 111 medicines that are on back order. They're warning people that we're not able to get the prescription medications here like we want to. Way back in the very beginning of this health crisis, I was talking about how a large portion of over-the-counter and prescription medications are manufactured overseas, which is just crazy to me that would be happening. India, China, certain areas in Asia are the prominent places that most of our medicines are made. And for various reasons, and right now, a supply chain, it's making it difficult to get them. So if you're on certain medications that are keeping you alive, I'd certainly start talking to your doctor or working on a plan to kind of stockpile them, which is something that I advise to do as much as you can. I understand it's a little difficult with prescription medications, but you usually can have at least a 3 and sometimes up to a 6 month supply of them. But there's more than that. I mean, we're hearing stuff like chicken tenders. Oh my goodness, chicken tenders. I mean, I don't know how, those people at Chick-fil-A, or I guess, I don't know that I've even ever been to Chick-fil-A, but I'm assuming they sell chicken tenders there, and how people are going to handle a shortage of chicken tenders. They're also talking about Christmas trees. Thankfully, we don't do Christmas trees and have them in our homes, but for those of you that do, it may be a little hard to get them. And when you find them, they're probably going to have a, higher price tag, because that's just how the laws of supply and demand are. On top of all this, there's other products like coffee. Coffee is being hurt by the supply chain, but coffee is also being hurt by the grand solar minimum. Coffee is one of those plants, probably none of you have ever grown coffee because it doesn't really grow in the United States, really. But coffee is a plant it's a little fickle. And a little on the delicate side, and a lot of, odd weather this past year has really damaged the coffee crop, and they're expecting that this shortage to last for the next 2 or 3 years potentially. And coffee futures are going up, so there's more. We're seeing more and more all across the board of shortages. But it's not just a supply chain problem. This article here really says a lot. It's not a supply chain problem. It's a global economy problem. The supply chain isn't collapsing. The global economy is collapsing. And I'll get into more of why I think that's happening. But if you look across the board, in most countries, they're seeing inflation right now. Most countries are seeing supply chain problems, or some type of problem in their economy, in their supply chain, in energy, fuel, food, everywhere. Most countries now are experiencing some level of problem. I mean, look at this. This is GDP per capita. This is global. This is the entire world. And you can see in this chart, it starts up in 1961, fairly high, and it does a zigzag. And if you look at those lows, some of those lows are in the late 70s and early 80s. And there's another one that's in 2008. Obviously the big, housing bubble crash then caused a lot of problems around the world. But then look at now. This is a problem, folks. This is not the supply chain causing this problem. This isn't anything else other than the world economies are collapsing. We're seeing that all around the world, that markets everywhere are starting to show signs of collapse, showing signs of not being able to maintain the stability that people are used to. Part of the problem with the supply chain isn't getting things moved around and getting things unloaded and getting things delivered to your place, your house, or to your business or your store that you go to. A big part of the problem with the supply chain is that the stuff just isn't getting manufactured on a level that's needed to keep up with the demands. They're just not able to do it. Now, my opinion is that they are able to do this. It's funny how all of a sudden, I mean, the population didn't make a massive jump in numbers in 2020. Okay, there wasn't like a whole bunch of people came into existence then. It wasn't like a whole bunch of people started, buying lots and lots more stuff than what was normally being bought. Maybe the market shifted a little bit because a lot of people were staying home versus going to work or whatever. But still, my opinion is that this is somehow in various little areas of the supply chain and manufacturing and the economies, it's being manipulated, because this fits with the narrative that the planet cannot sustain this. It's unsustainable. The amount of people on the planet, the amount of consumerism on the planet, the amount of manufacturing, all that stuff is not sustainable, which is what the globalist elite, the Great Reset, the New World Order, Agenda 2030, all these carbon net zero agendas and stuff, that's what they're all saying, is that it's not sustainable. And so I think that's one of the big reasons why I've been saying all along that everything that we're seeing happen with the supply chain, I believe that there's someone behind the scenes, the grand wizard behind the curtain that's pulling the levers and pushing the buttons. I think that's what's happening. I mean, we may not have, exact evidence of that, but it seems really hard to believe that just out of nowhere, all of a sudden, there's just not enough stuff to go around. this is, I believe, orchestrated. They want to show us, because their agenda, what we've been talking about here for months. Well, you're not going to be eating real meat anymore. I saw an article the other day that there were some food companies, these like Impossible burgers and stuff that are now being sold that look like meat, taste like meat, smell like meat, but they're grown in a lab. Now they're doing the same thing. They're taking that same concept, but they're using beetles and worms and stuff like that to make little hamburger patties and chicken nuggets and things like that out of worms and bugs, because that's what the World Economic Forum has been pushing. They've been pushing that you're going to eat bugs and you're going to love it. You're not going to own anything and you're going to love it. And you're not going to get to go anywhere and you're going to love it. On and on, all this stuff that we're being told. I think that's why we're seeing, purposely allowing the borders to just be standing wide open. I mean, Europe's been doing that for years, taking on refugees, and we've seen how the decay in Europe because of that. And now that's been the agenda here, is just leave the borders wide open, allow people to come in so that we can have this excuse of this is why the supply chain's not working, this is why crime's gone up, this is why diseases are being spread around, this is why the current welfare system can't sustain all this. All these problems are self-created. They're creating these problems so then of course they can come back through later and they can fix the problems. And I believe this supply chain is one of them, where when we see the global GDP basically fall off a cliff and take a nosedive to a place that it's never really been before, I don't know how most people can look at that and say, well, the economy's doing great. When you look at the GDP here in the United States, especially the GDP to debt ratio, which is inching closer and closer to like 130%. And for any of you that have any kind of knowledge or training or understanding of economies, that's really, really bad. In fact, it's usually considered bad for a nation's GDP to debt ratio to go above 60%. They like to keep it in that 20 to 30% range. When it goes above 60%, it's usually a sign of concern, meaning that they've taken on way too much debt. They can't sustain it. When it crosses that 100% threshold, that's just awful, and usually collapse, from what I have read, and I'm not an economist, but from what I've read, usually collapse starts to be expected somewhere around the 130 to 135% debt to GDP ratio. And we're getting pretty close to that. So there's evidence all around, no matter what they say on TV, that the economy's doing great. There's evidence all around that it's not. And I think it's orchestrated. I think that's why we're seeing the supply chain problems. We're seeing all this stuff. It's to distract us, and it's to create a necessity for their plan. We've always said that, the government, they never let a good emergency go to waste, a good crisis go to waste. They also orchestrate those crises, or they do things along the way to kind of help the crisis further along, because what it does is it creates a need for them. It's also creating a massive wealth transfer. All this supply chain problems, while they're wreaking havoc on most all businesses, they are destroying small businesses. Most of these big businesses, they're kind of able to, they have bigger bank accounts, so they're able to kind of, withstand problems. They're able to order in bulk. They're able to stock up better. They're able to get a better price of stuff. Someone like Walmart and Amazon, the little mom and pop gift shop, down on the square in your town can't do that. And they're closing doors left and right, because we're seeing a massive wealth transfer from small town America, from mom and pop stores, from the middle class businesses, which have been the number one engine pushing this economy along for the last century. We're seeing those just disappear left and right. And I think that's orchestrated too. Back when they were doing lockdowns on businesses couldn't open, the mom and pop stores couldn't open, but a big huge Walmart with 500 people in it could stay open. It totally made a lot of sense. So again, with the supply chain problems, and I think they're going to, regardless of how bad this new variant is, I have no doubt that it's going to be used to further the agenda of economic collapse. I really believe they want economic collapse. That's why they want to do that, to bring in a a global digital currency. They want to bring in one central global banking system. They want to, bring in basically a global governance system. That there's much less independence and less independence within a nation, within people. It would solve the Second Amendment problem for them here in the United States. Oh yeah, well, the Constitution says that, but guess what? This international law now supersedes it, and so your guns are gone away. These are the things that they want to do, folks. It's not me making this up. They flat out say it. You read the articles, the books that they write, the videos they put out. This is what they want to do. So maybe I'm off on this, but they're still pushing this agenda, this narrative of this new variant being so scary, even though most of the experts now are coming out saying that it's really, really mild, but yet the hype is still there. And now they're warning us about it affecting the supply chain even more. So I expect, as we get closer to the end of the year, Christmas and holidays and stuff like that, we're going to see more and more problems, folks, which is why you should continue to get your house in order and prepare yourselves mentally, physically, and especially spiritually. There's no end in sight right now. And I think it's becoming pretty apparent what their agenda is. All right, folks, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.